Days after a record number of Americans voted, the presidential election is finally nearing a conclusion, with former Vice President Joe Biden inching ahead of President Trump in several battleground states. But even as the count winds down, the political war in this nation continues. President Trump, as you know, is insisting the election is far from over. He is alleging widespread voter fraud without evidence. And while some veteran Republicans are speaking up and urging him to stop, many in the party stand with him and actually feel emboldened. After Tuesday, the GOP is now clinging on to the Senate majority and has picked up seats in the House. Across the aisle, Democrats are upbeat with the White House now within reach and possible victories looming in the South and the Sun Belt. And Senator Harris is poised to be the first black woman to ever serve as vice president. But they also know they have a lot of work to do. And joining me tonight to discuss this historic American crossroads is Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, Peter Baker, Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Susan Davis, congressional correspondent for National Public Radio and co-host of NPR's Politics podcast. But first, let's turn to Joe Biden, who has been urging calm and projecting confidence from his campaign headquarters.
I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. Now, every vote must be counted. No one's going to take our democracy away from us. Not now, not ever. Democracy is sometimes messy. It sometimes requires a little patience as well. But that patience has been rewarded now for more than 240 years.
Let's begin with Joe Biden and Yamiche Alcindor. You're at the White House. You're talking to Republican sources. They know that Joe Biden may speak tonight. It's been reported by CBS News and others that he may address the nation tonight. But the Associated Press has yet to call the race. What is this moment for President Trump and for Vice President Biden? What do you hear, Yamiche?
Well, for Vice President Biden, it's really the culmination of decades of work, decades of service in the government. Really, this is a moment where he's looking out at his career and realizing that he might be within grasp of becoming the next president of the United States. And as you noted, Senator Kamala Harris will be making history as the first woman, first black woman, first Asian to be a vice president of a major party. So I think, and vice president of the United States. So that's really what's on the cusp for them. Of course, they have a lot of things that they need to balance with progressives and governing with what looks like a Republican-controlled Senate. But for President Trump, he's really been resigned, angry, watching TV, lashing out at people, taking names, wanting Republicans to come out and back his unfounded claims. I've been talking to sources at the White House who feel like this is the White House that's winding down. The president has really made some of the most dishonest statements that we've seen in his presidency thus far. He gave a speech last night where almost every sentence was false, making claims about votes magically appearing, making claims about Democrats stealing the election from him. Of course, the way that our system works is that votes are being counted and that he is losing leads in critical battleground states like Pennsylvania and the new battleground state, essentially, of Georgia.
Sue, how do you read Vice President Biden's handling of this fragile moment in American democracy?
Well, Vice President Biden...
Well, I think Democrat...
Sorry, Yamiche, that was for Sue Davis.
Sorry.
We're all doing our best here.
Oh, it's okay. We're all doing our best. I think Joe Biden and I think the Democratic Party see part of what happened in this election was the American people sent a message that they want more stability. So I think that Biden has been very measured in his response here. He has not gone out and declared victory. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi earlier today said that she hasn't even spoken to Joe Biden yet, that they don't want to have that official phone call until the race has been officially called, sort of respecting all the norms and all the traditions that Donald Trump blew up over the past 4 years. I think there's going to be a big discussion over what this election meant and what it's going to mean for the agenda and what can get done in Washington. But I don't think that there's any doubt that Joe Biden sees part of his election as returning some semblance of normalcy and familiarity to the way the president conducts himself in the Oval Office.
So if he does end up in that Oval Office, Peter, what would his mandate be as President Biden based on Tuesday's result?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, look, he's going to win a substantial popular vote victory no matter what. We don't know yet, obviously, what the Electoral College count could be if he ends up holding on to the states where he's currently leading, he would have 306 electoral college votes, which, by the way, would be exactly the same number that President Trump won 4 years ago, and that President Trump, of course, called a landslide and a mandate for his own agenda. I think Vice President Biden's agenda, obviously, as Sue was just saying, is normalcy to some extent. It's calm. The first, ticket on his punch card is obviously going to have to be the coronavirus, which everybody is still not only suffering from, but we're seeing worse spikes than ever. This week, while we're paying attention to the election, the number of cases in America has gone up by 50% to a new high, about 120,000 cases a day, and deaths are beginning to rise as well in a way that's very disturbing. If that hasn't gotten under control by the time President-elect Biden takes office, if he were to win, no question that would be number one. But I think broadly speaking, he wants to sort of restore alliances with our international partners, and he'll have to work with what seems to be a likely Republican Senate, which will probably temper some of the more ambitious ideas that a lot of liberals who were working for him had hoped he would be able to advance.
Yamiche, I'm also trying to understand the Biden coalition. What did you learn this week? One thing I picked up in the exit polls from CNN and others was the Latino vote is certainly not a monolith. President Trump actually did better with Latino voters this time around than he did in 2016.
That's right. There is this narrative coming from the Trump campaign saying that they did better among black men, among Latino men. That being said, still overwhelmingly white voters in this country backed President Trump by big numbers. When you look at the Biden coalition, just looking at the exit polls, I was looking at the New York Times exit polls, and you see something interesting. Non-college educated voters, they broke for kind of evenly for both President Trump and Joe Biden. Then when you look at people who are making money and looking at wages, I saw, at least in the New York Times exit polls, that people who were making less money, under 100,000, working class Americans, they were breaking, white Americans, they were breaking for Joe Biden. He still held on to a substantial number of African American voters, of course, but we see him, of course, winning critical battleground states like Michigan, like Wisconsin. That tells you that Joe Biden was able to, in some ways, pull together and chip away at the coalition that sent President Trump to the presidency. I think the soul searching right now that's going on in the Democratic Party that I sense talking to sources is that there are a lot of people wondering, why is this race so close? Of course, we're not talking about the popular vote, we're talking about the electoral college vote. There are a lot of people who are saying all of the messages that Democrats made, all of the messaging on President Trump's alleged racist language, his immigration policy, separating families, all of the things that we've seen the president do, downplaying the coronavirus, he still was able to get millions of Americans, almost half the country, to back him, and that is something that Joe Biden's really going to have to contend with.
And Sue, when you look at the political map, what catches your eye? I saw Georgia, such a tight race. Maybe Democrats are making gains in the South, but then I looked further south to Florida. President Trump did well. What's happening in America when you look at that map?
You know what I think is interesting about this election is, in some ways, it really was a status quo election. The country decided that they wanted Republicans to keep the Senate, they wanted Democrats to keep the House. There was virtually no changes in state legislatures, which is pretty remarkable in a national year. The one thing that this country decided they didn't want anymore was Donald Trump, or so it may seem. We know the election hasn't been fully called. And I think there's a lot of soul searching about what that means. I think Republicans in some ways feel very heartened and encouraged by this election, that there was this fear that President Trump could, cause sweeping losses down the ballot, that the suburbs in this country would be out of play for Republicans for elections to come. And that didn't happen. And I think that the fact that that didn't happen has sort of put Democrats back on their heels a little bit. And many Democrats, especially many progressive Democrats, not only believed that that was the election that was going to happen, but the election that they needed to be able to advance some of the ideas and the agenda items that their party supports. So the election's a bit of a head scratcher, and I think you're going to have Republicans, I think, dug in, maybe not necessarily behind the president, but on a lot of the ideas and on a lot of the agenda that the president put forward. I don't think that they're looking at this election as if those issues were big losers. I think on immigration, on trade, on the economy, although the president was a bit more traditional on economic issues, the party has still shifted more towards the ideology of Donald Trump. He may have lost this election, but he's still going to be the most popular figure in the Republican Party, and I think he's going to continue to have a tremendous amount of sway over what Republicans and the party stands for.
To steal the phrase from Sue Davis, dug in, President Trump is dug in. He remains defiant tonight. He has alleged widespread voter fraud and corruption. But his statements, let's be clear, run counter to what election officials are saying nationwide. But here is a glimpse, a little snapshot of what the president said on Thursday. And we must note again, he does not have evidence to back up these claims.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. We think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof, and it's going to end up perhaps at the highest court in the land.
Peter, where is this president in terms of his legal battle against the election's result? It was reported that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, was looking for a James Baker to help out with the process. You've written the book with your wife, Susan Glasser, on James Baker. What makes 2020 different than 2000 when Baker was at Bush's side?
Yeah, well, in fact, I called Secretary Baker just yesterday to ask him about this. And he said, look, there are huge differences between this and the Florida recount in 2000. For one thing, in Florida, it was a recount. As Secretary Baker pointed out, they didn't get into a legal battle until after all the votes in Florida had been counted and then gone through a machine recount. And then it was at that point the Democrats were seeking hand recounts and the Republicans were saying enough is enough. Here you've got a president who says stop the count period before it's even been completed a first time. And as Secretary Baker said, that's not an easy position to defend in a democracy. That's not the kind of thing that the president should be doing in his view. So if they want a James Baker type, they're not getting any support from the actual James Baker. And the problem for them is they don't really have any legal grounds right now for anything that would back up what the president is saying. The kinds of suits that they're filing are really at the margins. Things like, should observers be 6 feet away from the ballots as they're being counted, or 20 feet away, or, small things like that, procedural things like that. There are some lawsuits that are being filed with larger sweep that judges are just simply tossing out wholesale without even really giving much of a back of the hand because they're so they're so ungrounded in anything. And there's nothing right now that the president has come up with that justifies any suspicion that there is a wholesale stealing of the election. I mean, to justify what the president said last night, you'd have to believe that there's this far-reaching conspiracy that stretches from coast to coast, multiple cities, multiple counties, multiple states, including states with Republican governors, and somehow they're all keeping it hidden and secret from the rest of us. That doesn't seem very likely, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence of it.
Yamiche, NBC News just reported tonight that Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito has issued an order on this Pennsylvania case about the count in Pennsylvania to have ballots continue to be segregated, but the count continues. The count will continue in Pennsylvania. I spoke to Matt Schlapp, a Trump ally, earlier today. He's in Nevada. The Trump campaign's spoiling for a fight there. They have raised concerns about fraud in Nevada. They're fighting in Pennsylvania. What's the real story when you talk to people at the White House tonight about how long this fight will play out?
Well, that's the key question. How long is the president going to put up a fight? And can he put up a fight in multiple states if he begins to lose multiple states? If he loses Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Nevada, can he really try to launch these legal battles to get everything recounted in all of those states? I had a Trump advisor tell me today the only path that the president sees to victory at this point is to have recounts in those critical states that I just mentioned. So the president is really teetering on this because the math just isn't on his side. He has to run the table in order to make this work for him. Another thing to note is that the president, as Peter just said, he's wanting people to believe this conspiracy theory that is going from coast to coast. But let's also remember that last night the president was touting a red wave, talking about the fact that Republicans picked up seats in the House, talking about the fact that Republicans look poised to keep the Senate. You would have to believe that the conspiracy theory that the president is wanting people to believe only affected him because the down ballot races went mainly in the Republicans' way. So the president is touting in some ways the votes that he likes while also telling people, hey, don't count the votes that I don't like. Don't count the votes that look like they might not be for me. As we know, these historic mail-in ballots, most of them went to Joe Biden, mainly because Joe Biden was saying, be safe, vote early, vote by mail, while President Trump was saying, actually, I want you to come in person. Advisors of the president had been telling him that that was not a good strategy, but now he's in the situation where mail-in votes are continuously coming in and they're favoring Joe Biden in that way.